Nice to meet you, Dan.
Nice to meet you
I'm
too.
I'm very excited to have you on my show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Is it your studio?
Yes, this is my studio. Yeah, it's kind of crazy right now.
Well, it looks awesome.
Thank you.
Introduce yourself to people who don't know anything about you, like say a few words about yourself and your art.
Sure. So I am an American artist. I'm
Mhm.
also Vietnamese. I live and work in Dallas, Texas. And I primarily work in sculptures, but I make all kinds. Freestanding ones that sit on shelves, for walls. Um, Yeah, I'm kind of known for like a certain look. They are organic, blobby, drippy, very colorful pieces.
You have your master's degree from the Arizona State University, right? What kind of art did you do then? How is it different from now?
I did get my master's in painting and drawing. So when I went and I started, I was pretty much just working on the walls. And I started becoming very interested in sculpture during my time at Arizona State.
Mhm.
And I wanted to create a body of work for my thesis that was sculptures, but I kind of honed it back in and stayed on the walls. But the work became very sculptural. I
Mhm.
started working with a lot of the materials that I work with now, including polyurethane foam, resins I'd been working with for a little bit, but they were large scale, like maybe 4 by 4 feet or 5 by 5 feet. They sat on the wall, but they would come off the wall and were very had a lot of uh, form to them.
Mhm. And what did professors think of your art?
um, I think for the most part, my professors were supportive, but there was definitely a they were supportive of me working into sculpture.
Mhm.
And I think that kind of speaks to the program and where it is now after I've graduated, because I think they've done away with all of the separate areas of study and it's just one general degree
Mhm.
now. But as far as my own personal work, I think the professors were supportive, but the most support I got was from other students. Um, yeah, when I did my thesis show, it was the feedback from the work that I presented was just so positive, and people are just really really excited about it. So that made me, it made me feel like I had done something right.
What year was it?
So I graduated in 2014.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'm very interested to learn about your creative process because I'm a painter, not a sculptor, and I like to learn how you create your ideas first and then what materials you use and how you combine them together.
Usually, the way I work is I have ideas and I have concepts, but I don't sketch. I don't like necessarily pre-plan because the materials that I use they aren't controllable the way something like clay for ceramics is. With clay, you can get very detailed and sculpt and make it very precise to how you want it. And so I think in that case, like sketching something would make sense. Like I have this idea, I need to get it out, and then let me make this shape based on the sketch. But for me, a lot of times it's just a loose idea I have in my mind of how I want something to look. And then I will use the materials to make that happen.
Mhm.
Um, so, I mean, I'll jot down ideas, sometimes a loose sketch here and there, but really, um, it comes out in the form of words, and then I execute from there. But a lot of the materials I use, like polyurethane foam, resin, different varieties of resins, glues, some epoxy clay. Um, these things, they have sort of their own properties. And so when you work with them, you learn like, oh, this one, if I mix it too early and I pour it too early, then it's going to create this effect. Or if I wait too long to pour it, it's going to create this effect. So based on those details, I'll be working on something and I'll think, oh, let me let me actually try to replicate that the next time if I did something by accident, let's say. Um, and then it kind of just it evolves from there. You know, you're
Mhm.
doing the process, you're working with the materials, and the materials kind of teach you what they're capable of and how you can possibly manipulate them, I guess, to a certain extent to get what you want.
But like, how do you start? Let's say it's foam. Do you carve it out and then uh, pour acrylic over it, or there is something else to it?
No, so it's a lot of layering of materials.
Okay.
I'm not, there have been works where I have taken things away, but most of my work now is built upon. So I start with foam. I use resin to, as like a structural support, and then paint, more resin, texture, color, and it
Mm-hmm.
just builds up from there. So by the time the piece is finished, it's very far from the original state of the material.
Okay. And do you envision the final form before you start, or it's whatever happens in the process of making it?
So generally I have an idea of what I want, and
Okay.
I create the form based on that. So it's an idea in here, and like I mentioned, like I don't sketch it out really
Mm-hmm.
because I can't get precise with it. So I have an idea of what I want to happen, and then I work with the materials to make it happen. Um, so it is like an image. It's like I see it in my mind, and then I go from there.
So describe one of your ideas then.
The one I'm working on currently is it's a large scale, well, large for me. It it looks kind of like a chair. I actually just posted it a few weeks ago to my Instagram of some process. But you know, I work at like a smaller scale, usually like, I don't know, like like this big. And then sometimes when I do that, I'll think, oh, what if I enlarge this? What if I can make this bigger?
Mm-hmm.
And so in the piece I'm currently working on, that's what's happening. Is I had worked with some of these shapes that were like, they kind of look like waterfalls.
Mm-hmm.
Is how I would describe it. There's some Most of my stuff is very organic, but there's some like structural elements, and on the small scale it worked, and so I said, let's try to make this big. And so when you do that, there's different things that have to shift because the scale shifts. So the properties of the material change, and you can't control it the same way. So that it would be an example of like how the material kind of teaches me what I can and can't do with it. So I've, become pretty efficient at working at it at a certain scale, and then when I shift everything, suddenly it changes, and I have to problem solve to make that idea in my mind be
Mm-hmm.
possible.
Do you use the same materials for your sculptures of a different scale? Let's say if you work on a small piece, do you use the same materials for that, or you change them depending on the size of your sculpture?
Yeah, so I have pieces that are like 8 feet tall, and
Mm-hmm.
the material has to change. Um, it's something that I kind of see when it changes that much. I kind of see the smaller works that I do as models, or
Mm-hmm.
like tests for these
Mm-hmm.
larger things, or reference. So once I shift up to life size or bigger, that everything does have to change because the materials I use at a small scale don't have the same structural support. So I can't, if it's like big and someone can like touch it, and there's a new concern there of it breaking or collapsing.
Mm-hmm.
So it has to be strong.
So what's on the inside of a big sculpture?
Well, usually for the
Is it
large
light?
sculpt
Is it light or heavy or?
for the big sculptures, they're pretty heavy. But
Okay.
my regular size sculptures, they're very light. It just really depends. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so drawn to the materials I am, is because I think there's this lightness to them
Mm-hmm.
that they look heavy, but they are light. And I like
Mm-hmm.
that sort of surprise that happens when people pick something up. They're like, oh my gosh, this is so much lighter than I thought. But for large scale stuff, yeah, they're heavy. They get, when they're big, there's like wooden armature or metal armature underneath to give it,
Okay.
that base. Yeah.
And so what do you have on top of the wooden structure? Do you use a resin over it or?
So with the larger pieces, it's a little bit more traditional method, but I use foams mostly. It's mostly foam,
Mm-hmm.
and it has to be stuff that's like the paint shifts. Like I use more automotive paints because they're stronger and they're like,
Mm-hmm.
they're knowing that if something's going to be big and people are going to be interacting with it, you have to take into account, that interaction. And so you have to think about like the weather and outside and people.
Mm-hmm.
So the materials, you have to find things that are just tougher and can withstand all of that.
Okay. Do you sand them or no?
Like ship them?
No, like doing
Oh, sand
sanding.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, yes. Sanding takes the longest.
Yeah.
Sanding is one of the longest things for all of the large scale pieces. It's something that I think, it's not like the prettiest part or the most interesting part of the process.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think people don't necessarily share it as much. But for anything big, there's a ton of sanding involved and it takes
Mm-hmm.
forever. I'd say that's the longest part.
Mm-hmm. You use very bright neon-like colors. What kind of paints are these?
So I use most of my colors are fluorescent. They're neon
Yeah,
colors. Yeah.
yeah.
So I use a mix of golden or Createx, anything that gives me the most vibrant color I
Mm-hmm.
can get. And the cool thing about using the neons is under black light, they glow. So that's
Yeah.
another like little surprise that happens.
Mm-hmm. I think it's the most exciting part about the sculptures because they have such bright colors. And I like how they flow one to another.
Mhm.
It's beautiful. Do you want to mention any specific brands of paints?
Yeah, so golden is my main one. I
Golden
love
main
golden.
one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I've tried other brands, but golden really, I mean, they're one of the best. So they've got
Mm-hmm.
it unlocked and they have a really wide range of colors. And when I use them, of course I mix my own colors too. So it's nice that they have a wide range of fluorescence because it's not, like fluorescent colors, there's issues with them too because they're not light fast. So
Mm-hmm.
when they sit in the sun for a long time, they'll start to
Mm-hmm.
fade. And I think golden has been one of the best for like longevity.
Yeah, yeah, it's a very good, yeah,
Mm.
very good brand. What about your resin? What kind of resin do you use?
So I use a mix of stuff. It just depends on my needs. But my favorite is art resin. I really, really like art
Mm-hmm.
resin. It has a
Okay.
good amount of flexibility. And so that's nice sometimes when you need something to have, if you need it to be able to have some give. When you use a resin that's too hard, it can crack very easily if you
Mm-hmm.
drop it or something like that. So art resin's really nice. I also really like this brand called Entropy Resin. They are I believe it's like an offshoot of West Systems, which is a really established brand of resins. They're used in
Mm-hmm.
everything. But Entropy Resins uses the excess from West Systems. So it's they call it a bioresin because it's like recycled material. They're
Mm-hmm.
repurposing it. And they have a great range of like different hardnesses, different cure times, casting resins, laminating resins. So their range is really broad, and it's really fun to play with their stuff because they just have so many options. But I like the idea of we're using plastic, so it's nice to know that it's coming from something that's like kind of second generation.
Do you mix your colors into the resin or you layer the resin on top of the color?
It's a mix.
It's a
It
mix.
just depends. Yeah. I'll add color to resin often
Mm-hmm.
because I like that play of how colors are mixing through the layers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, there's some like optical mixing that happens when you do that, and you're not sure if like, oh, is that a purple, is that a blue, and you get it close, and you're like, oh, it's actually both. So there's some fun things that I like to do with that stuff.
Okay. You divide your portfolio into three sections: blobs, drapes, and squishes.
Yeah.
How did you come up with these names?
So yeah, they're playful because my work is very playful. And I wanted words that were kind of like onomatopoeias, they sound like what they look like.
Mm-hmm.
So they're just, they're just like a fun way to organize them.
If you like this video, please share it with your friends, leave a comment, or rate this podcast. Thanks so much.
I'm just thinking that I'd like to take one piece from your portfolio collection and you describe how you come up with the idea and how you build it. Is that
Okay.
okay?
Yeah. Okay. What is it called?
The Empress. It's very light.
It's actually, I remember making this one. Of course, I remember all of them, but this one was special because it was the first one I made like this.
Okay.
And so, yeah, 2020, I started doing everything drippy. Before 2020, I did these little spikes on top of my forms. And so this was like a time where my texture changed. And I remember I had the idea for this piece just in my mind, like I mentioned, like it's always, just up here. And I really wanted to play with these iridescent colors. So one of the things about color that I like to explore is, like I mentioned, this optical mixing that happens, when you're far away from something and there's layers of colors and then you get up close. It's just like painting, like optically mixing a black,
Yes,
layering all the colors. Yeah. So there's this, it's kind of like a movement that happens. There's something you're like, what is it doing? So I wanted to play with these pigments these are iridescent pigments, but essentially they're kind of like a chameleon pigment where depending on where you're standing and the lighting, they might look one color and then you move and they might be another color. So this pigment was doing the things that I wanted to capture within like the colors that I was using. So yeah, it's like I made the form, I made the shape, the texture, and then I finished it with this iridescent color, and it really like launched a whole thing for me.
Okay. So the next one is microdose. It's in the blobs section.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, so microdose, I go back and forth between working on wall pieces. It's like sometimes I focus on the squishes, sometimes I focus on the drips. So there was this moment last year where I was just fully focused on these wall pieces, again with like this idea of optical mixing. So, I made these forms, I painted them, and then I put this texture on top and was like, it's almost like I almost saw it as like mosaic. I wanted to find something that could cover all the cracks and then just have this object be colorful and blobby and makes you get up close to it and wonder like what's happening with those colors. I'm currently working on some different things, but along in the same vein. So a lot of the pieces that I put up on my website this is more of a portfolio, and they're pieces that were kind of catalysts or important moments in what I was doing. So then they spark more after the fact.
I want to ask these questions, but you don't have to answer.
Okay.
I can just cut it out.
Okay.
If you don't want to answer.
Okay.
Is it the influence of mushrooms?
Oh, absolutely. Yes,
Okay.
for sure. Yeah. So a lot of the things that I've been thinking about have to do with perception and reality. And, when I first in my career, when I was first being interviewed for my work, everybody was like, oh my gosh, like they're so psychedelic. Your work looks like it's influenced by mushrooms or acid or whatever. And I, for me, those things have been very influential in my life and in just for me as a person. But my work was never directly about those things. So I never was making work about trips, or like things that I saw, but they come out. They just naturally, because it informs who I am. So of course it's going to come out in the work. So for a long time, I didn't like address it in a direct way. But last year I was like, I just want to open those doors fully and go all in. So yeah, for sure.
Okay. Because it's obvious,
Yeah. Yeah.
What did you learn from your trips? What did it give you?
I've had some very intense trips. One of the first times I took it, I was in college. So I was in like my early 20s. And I think that was the first time I was able to actually see with my eyes the connectedness of everything, all living things just together. Me with another person, with my cat, with the trees, with the grass, everything. Everything was alive. And so to be able to see it was amazing. It really just connected it all for me and made me more sensitive to life, I think. So that was a big lesson. And then I had a really intense trip where I mean, it was like an ego death. Like I died. And that was so heavy. I can't verbalize the trip itself, but what I can say is coming back from there it was like I was piecing together this reality. So when I was coming back, I was like, I remember having thoughts about my mom, but then not understanding what mother meant, or like family or love, relationships. Like it had to start to like piece itself back together in order for me to come back into this form, which was amazing because, what was on the other side it was just simple. It was just nothing, but it was really beautiful. And then knowing that how we exist, physically now in this place, is a sort of construct, and I think there's freedom in knowing that. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
It's always interesting to know what people get out of it because there is a lot of stigma about drugs in general, and psychedelics get lumped into this general category. But there is very little education and understanding of true power of psychedelics. So
I absolutely agree. And I think one of the things too, I think maybe that's like part of why when I was early on in my career where people were asking me about those things, it was difficult to talk about because there is this there is a stigma associated with it. But as I've like progressed and become more comfortable of where I am, I think by talking about it, it makes it more not commonplace, but it opens a dialogue, and at least there's a dialogue. Because I remember when I was in high school or when I was a kid, no one was talking about it. And so there's almost a danger to that, where if you don't talk about it, then there's no safe resources. There's no communal sharing of knowledge, and you could end up on a bad trip and then, whatever it is. So I think it's important to talk about and share.
Yeah. I appreciate your honesty. That's very nice of you. So what's your favorite time to create?
At night.
At night?
Yeah. It's always been that way. Usually the sweet spot I'd say is like 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. But like I have to like wake up and stuff. So I can't I can't have long studio nights like that very much. But I tend to like liven up at night. Like when the sun sets, I start getting like, my antsy and like want to make stuff.
Me too. Yeah. I'm a night person. Yeah. I don't function in the morning.
Me neither. Yeah. What sucks though is when winter comes and the days get shorter, and so you don't get as much sunlight which is, I feel like pretty, I mean, it's necessary. We have to have it. But that's seasonal thing.
What do you think is your biggest failure and success?
I don't like the idea of failure in that as a term that means something negative, because I feel like in my process and in my work, I work with mistakes. I work with materials that are sometimes unpredictable, and there are things that happen that I can't control. And so knowing that that's going to happen, it allows me to gain some insight instead of thinking like, oh, I messed this up, I failed. It's like, oh, well, this happened and I didn't expect it, but like maybe I can do something with this. So it's more of like learning an opportunity. So I wouldn't say I'm a biggest failure. Biggest success, I think probably like some of my larger scale stuff. Last 2021, I made in my studio, I made a like 8-foot tall sculpture that showed at the National Sculpture Garden here in Dallas. And that was a very intense process of creating it, and like 2 months of solid every day in there, like just working very hard. And then being able to present it to the world was really nice. And I had done things on it that I had never used before, like different materials. So to approach something at that scale and to use materials that I wasn't used to and have it be successful was a really good feeling. So I'd say that was probably one of my biggest successes.
Do you have a team of artists working for you, or it's just you creating your pieces?
So it is just me. For large scale stuff, I will hire help. So like either like other artist friends or, find some assistants. I also will, for some larger stuff, will use fabricators. So like I make a model and then I send it to them and they fabricate based on the model. But as far as like the everyday day-to-day, it's just me.
I'd like to ask a few questions about the business side of things, because I think any tips would be helpful for so many artists that don't know where to start. I mean, I like the fact that you bypass the gallery system and you do it on your own. So can you share a few tips for artists?
I can try. So I do work with galleries. I think I do both. I like to balance both. Because I come from an academic background, I think that that's kind of like ingrained in me, like the gallery system, the museum, and wanting to aim for those things. But of course, it's not necessary in today's society with social media and all that stuff. Like you don't have to do the galleries. You don't have to do any of that. When I went full-time art, it was very scary. You don't know, like for like a couple years, like you do a show, you sell some work, and then you have that money and you're like, okay, I'm going to live off this money for the next, however many months until you hope that you get more sales or whatever. So I'd say early on, it's important to, just try to be conscious of how you're spending and what you're spending on. So for me, it was important to like focus my earnings on getting more materials. So it's basically like investing back in yourself. And just being smart about that. So of course, like pay your bills, pay your rent, all that stuff, but make sure that you're feeding and funding, what happens in the studio.
But did you think of a specific strategy how to do it, or it just kind of morphed into something?
Yeah. No, I was very lucky. I think that, it was a mix of like my work having a unique look and then getting on Instagram at the right time. A lot of my opportunities came from Instagram. It was like 2015 and everybody at the art world was like, we're all on Instagram now. And it was just a really great time for growth and like connecting with other people. It's different now. It's very different. But, I think it was just like a mix of the right things. And so from Instagram, a lot of like curators, galleries, other people like saw my work and they reached out directly and were like, we want to work with you. I guess at that point, my strategy was just to continue creating work and sharing it and being authentic about it, how I shared my work. It wasn't about, for me, it was never really about like getting views or likes or anything like that. I I would do something in the studio and I thought, oh, like I really like this moment. I want to share this moment with other people, and maybe they like it too, you know. So it came from a place of just wanting to share and like connect. Again, I know it's very different now because there's, you know, like it's social media is its own beast, but at the same time, like I think that I would say that still stands true. You know, like I share things that, yeah, I find interesting and think that maybe others might too.
Can you give one tip about Instagram for artists to grow their accounts?
I mean, I very much think like being authentic about what you share. If you're excited about something, I feel like people can feel that, you know, even though it's through a screen. Yeah, when you're excited, people know. Or when you make a piece that you like or love or just have that feeling about, like share it, you know, why not? And you just don't know what happens. So I think that's the other part too, is not being as self-conscious about like if it's gonna get likes and views and all that stuff. You just do it, and maybe it happens. Who knows what the algorithm wants, you know? But that's how I do it. And I actually I don't post a lot, so that's something that I've noticed can be like a pitfall of social media. Is some artists, I feel like they feel this need to create content, but it's really about creating the art. You need to create the art, and from that you may get content to share. But I think it's easy to start looking at it the other way, where it's like, oh, I need to create things to post. I mean, that's not how I would do it.
What do you think of AI art?
I think I'm still sitting in what that feels like, or what I think of it. I've played around with some of it, like Midjourney, which is really, I mean, it's cool, it's fun. Like I think it could be used as, at least for someone like me who makes physical sculptures, it could be like a great jumping off point for like if I type in something like a prompt and it pops something up that's like, oh, that's so weird, let me see if I can make that in real life, you know, like, so it could be like a springboard or a place to brainstorm. But as far as like how it will affect the art world or digital artists or any of that stuff, like I don't know. AI, it feels like it's like there's like something bigger that's going to happen, you know, like it just feels like it's at the precipice of something. I don't know how to feel about it. How do you feel about it?
I think it's a tool, and it's a fantastic tool. I think it's not at the point of replacing traditional artists because the resolution is too small, and it remains digital. But I think it can help people illustrate certain ideas or books or something else. But yeah, it's difficult to figure out the end result of it just yet. Yeah. But I'm not threatened by it. That's the thing.
Yeah. I mean, I've used also, I've played around with Chat GPT, which is so cool. Like it's the access to information. You know, we have Google and all that stuff, but then to have this thing that talks back to you essentially and like gives you information is really, really fun. Yeah,
I can see the use for Chat GPT. It's gonna replace a lot of manual labor. You know, it's like a research tool, so I think it's fantastic. I can't imagine what's going to happen in a decade from now.
I know. Well, I think about like you know, when people who have hit like 100 years old, and you like those interviews that they'll do with like people who've lived a whole century, and they ask them like, what's the biggest technology or what's the biggest change? And people will be like, oh, going from like hand washing clothes to the washing machine, you know, or something like that. But you look at the growth of the exponential growth of that from like 1900s to 2000 or whatever, right? Like it's insane. So for us, we're in it. And I think absolutely like in 10 years, I don't even know what it'll look like.
When I studied in school, we had black and white photography, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember submitting portfolios with actual slides.
Exactly, slides.
Yeah.
Why do you think art is important?
I think it's a very human thing. I think making art, wanting that need to create is an important part of like living.
Mm-hmm.
And so art is expression, art is everything. And I think people sometimes disregard it, you know, as like, oh, it's just, it's make believe, it's play, it's whatever. But I mean, I think art is at the heart of everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what do you want to say with your art?
I think for me, what I want is for my work to spark curiosity in other people. I think, you know, of course you can look at my work and just think like, oh, that's a beautiful object, you know, it's eye-catching, whatever. But my hope is that someone looks at it and thinks, oh, well, what's that made of? Or what is it? What is it? You know, and that just that question of what is it? There's a questioning of like reality and existence in it. So just like I think for me, I want that kind of like embracing of curiosity.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. That's a very sweet answer. I like that. You mentioned you're Vietnamese, right? Are you the second generation, or how did you come to the country?
We immigrated here.
Okay.
My mom and dad were refugees from Vietnam, and they, I think they left Vietnam in 1986 or 87, and I was born at a refugee camp in the Philippines.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then we came to the U.S. We came to Texas in Houston, where my dad already had some family. Yeah, so I had like a green card for a long time, and
I'm Russian, that's why I'm asking.
When did you come here?
In early 2000s, so it's been over 20 years living here. So.
Did you go to school in the U.S.?
Both. First, I studied in Moscow, but then I got my art degrees here. Who is your favorite artist?
Some of my favorites. I mean, of course, like James Turrell. When I think about the artists that I love the most, it's always about the experience that I have looking at their work. And so a lot of the artists that I love are like installation-based artists because they're creating environments, they're creating experiences. So James Turrell is like a classic. Every opportunity I have to see one of his pieces, it's absolutely like, let's go. Oliver Eliasson, who I saw his, I don't think it was maybe it was a retrospective, but it was at the Tate Modern in London. I saw it in 2019. And I had seen a show of his at the DMA here in Dallas, like when I was in college. And each time just blows me away. I hope to create work that does that to other people. Like yeah.
You mean inspirational?
Inspirational, but it's like, for me, it's like I'm very present when I see the work. I'm there. I'm fully in it and I am there. I'm not thinking about anything else. It's an all-encompassing thing. It's a moment. So it is inspirational when I reflect back on it, but at the time it's just like there's nothing else, you know?
I see what you mean. Okay.
Yeah.
What's your favorite hobby?
My hobby?
Besides art.
So I really like doing like physical things. Like I work out a lot. I love hiking. I recently started trail skating. So like rollerblades, but like going on trails and just doing like long distance skates. So just stuff like that, just like being physical.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to add before we quit?
I don't think so. It's been a great interview.
Yeah, I enjoy it too. It's fun. All right, then tell people where they can find you to see your art.
So I have a big project coming up with Meow Wolf. They are like an installation.
That's the question I wanted to ask. What's your next project?
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe this is what I should have shared.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this year I have quite a few things happening, but my next big project is with Meow Wolf. They're opening a location in Grapevine, Texas, which is one of the suburbs of Dallas. That'll open this summer, 2023. So I'm starting that installation next week. So that's going to be my largest. I'm doing a whole room, so it's going to be my largest scale work to date. So I'm doing that, and then I have a museum show that I'm a part of. It's a 4-person show in San Antonio, Texas, that opens in the spring. And then I have a solo show in Portland in July and a solo show in New York City in December.
Wow, man, you're busy.
I know. Yeah, hopefully I get some vacation in there. But
so how do you find these opportunities?
So I mean, the 2 solo shows, I've been working with those galleries for a while.
Okay.
And it was the same thing. They reached out to me through, like, they saw my work on Instagram, and I think then they saw it in person at, like, other shows, and then, or like the art fairs in Miami. And then we connected through that. The Meow Wolf thing, they reached out to me. I think that my work and Meow Wolf goes together really, really well. And so it was kind of a natural, connection. Same with the museum. They reached out to me. I don't know. I don't know how, I don't know how to do it the other way. Yeah.
Can you share what you are going to have in the museum show? How many pieces are you going to have?
I think I'm going to have about 20 to 30 pieces. It's a 4-person show, and all the artists are from Texas. So it focuses on Texas artists. It's called Beyond Reality. And so I think every artist, deals with something that's like not of this reality. And it's going to be like a collection of works from like the past few years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, fantastic.
Thank you.
Okay, then tell people how they can connect to you.
So I am on Instagram as Sopopomo, and I'm also on TikTok, same name. And then I also have my website, bydanlam.com.
Awesome. I'd like to thank you for your time and for sharing your creativity and inspiration. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.
Thanks so much for watching. All the links are in the show notes. Take care. Bye-bye.